Hello everyone, my name is Patrick Ryan, and today we're talking about how to hold drumsticks. So sticks up, shut up, and let's get into it. Okay, so there are about two-ish styles that most people tend to lean towards. The first style, most common, I think, is kind of like more of a fulcrum-centric grip, where the fulcrum is kind of this place in your first finger and your thumb, or sometimes even your middle finger and your thumb, and the stick will rotate around that pivot point. And then there's like a not so fulcrum centric one where we kind of just have an even amount of finger all around the stick, and we use mostly our wrist to make the actual stroke, to actually strike the drum. We use our wrist a little more. The big phrase that I was taught, specifically when I got to college, the big phrase that we use all the time with this style of drumming is contact without pressure. What does that mean? Well, contact without pressure means all of my fingers and my palm are in contact with the stick, but I'm not squeezing the crap out of the stick. No pressure. Contact without pressure, right? I can still wiggle around. The stick can still wiggle a little bit inside my hand, right? It's touching my palm. It's also touching the insides of my fingers. Step number one when holding a drumstick for the first time, or even for the 100th time, is you want to think about where that thumb's going to go. That's a pretty important piece of the pie, piece of the puzzle. That's a pretty important piece of how to hold a drumstick. That's a pretty important concept in how to hold a drumstick, because it's gonna become important later. Where we place our thumb is gonna be important later on down the road. So we wanna make sure it's in a good spot. Generally what I say is I tell my students to put their thumb at the very first third of the stick, their thumbprint. Take your thumbprint and put it at the very first third of the stick, right there on the center of the stick, right lined up. The index finger is a bit of a weird situation because this can easily be misconstrued as me setting up the fulcrum. I've learned that if I don't specifically address the fulcrum at the beginning, it doesn't become a huge issue later. A lot of people like to put a big emphasis on the fulcrum, and I don't. I don't like to do it because I don't use it as much as most people do. So what do I typically do when I have a brand new student, whether they've played before or they've never played at all? I typically will have them come in and sit down, and I will just say, hey, I want you to play 8 notes on your pad. That's it. And I don't tell them anything else. I don't tell them how to hold the stick. I don't tell them how to strike the drum. None of that stuff. Most people know what that means, right? Like, there doesn't have to be a whole lot of discussion about what 8 notes means. It could be anything, right? It can be right, left, it can be all rights, it can be all lefts. So my goal in doing this is kind of getting a good evaluation of what the student is gonna naturally just do. And I will say, most of the time, in my experience, I've been doing this for 20 some odd years, most of the time, I will see my students grabbing the stick kind of with their fingers all wrapped around. They don't usually immediately go for that fulcrum idea because they don't really know anything about that. And they'll grip the stick and they'll start playing 8 notes. And so after they do that, I get a good evaluation of what they're doing and how they're moving and how they're holding the stick. And I can usually make tiny adjustments instead of big adjustments. So I don't immediately come at you with, do this, hold it there, move this way. I get an evaluation for how you naturally move. And what this does is it reinforces the idea that moving and striking a drum and playing drums can be very, very natural and intuitive. And so I don't want to, give them any kind of training scar. I don't want them to get confused. I don't want them to misunderstand something, and I want it to be as natural as possible. And so by putting sticks in their hands and they just grab their sticks and they start playing, I can make tiny, tiny adjustments. And this reinforces the idea that it's natural and easy and there's not a whole lot to it. And it doesn't have to be complicated, because guess what? It's not complicated. But this is YouTube, so you and I aren't here face to face, so I can't make those corrections in real time. So, generally speaking, remember when we put our thumb in that first third, we're gonna take our index finger, that very first crease, take our index finger and place it, what I like to call, across the street from the thumb. Don't pinch, don't do anything. This is just for placement, all right? I'm not trying to get you to become a fulcrum-centric player, because you'll see why in just a moment, all right? So, first third with the thumb, place the index finger across the street, and now we kind of have a placement for the rest of our hand, all right? From there, Now that you've got this set up, the very next thing is to take our fingers and wrap them all the way around the stick. That's it. That's it. That's all I do. If you notice, there's not any kind of gap in my fingers, right? There's no gap between my butt and the rest of my fingers. That's the gap. There's no gap, all right? So I don't use any kind of gap there, and that's for a very specific reason. If there is a gap there, then that will reinforce the idea of our fulcrum, because then our fingers will be allowed to move. You see that? See how my fingers are allowed to move because I have that gap? If I don't have a gap, then my fingers can't move as much because they're holding the stick, right? Everything's wrapped around the stick, and that's where we want to be. Mind you, none of this is meant to be pressure. Not a lot of pressure, just enough to hold that stick in place. Don't squeeze, any of that. Again, I want to reiterate, this fulcrum idea is just a point of reference, okay? The thumb and the index finger is just a point of reference at this point in your drumming career. We will use it later, just not as much now, okay? Contact without pressure, right? Nice, loose. The no pressure allows our wrist to go up and down evenly and smoothly without any kind of stoppage, right? It's not gonna look rigid. I know a lot of people who say that when you wrap your fingers this closely around the stick, you get a very choppy, rigid motion. That's not the case. If you're nice and relaxed in your fingers, just because your fingers are relaxed doesn't mean they have to come off the stick. We wanna cradle the stick, because if we don't cradle the stick, when we start to go play fast things, we won't be there in time to make sure that we can play those fast things. We'll have to completely change our grip. So why is it important that we do this without pressure? Well, for starters, if I have a lot of pressure and I'm squeezing down with my fingers, those muscles inside my forearm are actually connected, right? There's the muscles down here that typically control your fingers, and there's the muscles up here in your forearm that control the up and down motion of your hand, right? I've noticed over the years, when I move my hand up and down like this and I engage my wrist, most of the time it's these muscles, for the majority. I'm sure there's some down here that are being involved as well. But when I chop out and I start to feel it, I feel it up here because I'm using my wrist. Now, on the bottom, when I engage my fingers, usually it's my bottom where it's the forearm right here where my fingers, I don't know if you can see it in the camera. When I engage my fingers, you can see usually, let's see if we can get it. Maybe down here. If I'm engaging my fingers, it's in focus, you can see this part of my muscle moving, and that's just me doing this with my fingers. So as I engage my fingers, it's moving this bottom part of my forearm. So because my forearm is all one piece of my arm, if I'm squeezing with those fingers, it's kind of gonna squeeze this part too. And as we just talked about, this part is what controls my hand going up and down. So if I'm squeezing my fingers, then I'm not able to freely move this as smoothly as I'd like to. So that's why we have to do the no pressure part. Contact with no pressure. If I'm squeezing, then I can't freely move my hand up and down. All right, so when we hold the stick and we're talking about contact without pressure, we want evenness through the grip, okay? And throughout many different videos on this channel, you're probably gonna hear me say things like front of the grip, middle of the grip, and back of the grip. The front of the grip is right here where the fulcrum is, right? The middle of the grip is typically these two fingers, your middle two fingers right here. That's what I consider the middle of the grip. And the back of the grip is somewhere between the pinky and the ring finger. Wait, yeah, ring finger. The last two fingers, right? So front of the grip is this fulcrum area, middle of the grip is your middle two fingers, back of the grip is your pinky and this ring finger. So we want evenness throughout our grip. We don't want to be squeezing at the front. We don't want to be squeezing in the middle. We don't want that. We don't want squeezing in the back. There's a time and place for all of those, and they're tiny, tiny, tiny adjustments that we'll go over in a different video. But for now, even pressure, if you even want to call it pressure, it's even throughout the stick. It's not stronger in the back than it is in the front, and it's not stronger in the front than it is in the back or the middle. It's not squeezing all the way through. Even distributed contact throughout the stick and our fingers so that our wrist can move freely. One fundamental problem I have with the squeeze release and or fulcrum situation with the finger jam is you have to open and close, right? Like at some point you have to engage your finger muscles to close your hand, and then you have to open them up to let the stick do what it wants to do, and then you have to close it again, you have to open it again, you have to close it again, you have to open it again, you have to close it again. And if you take a close look at what your hand does naturally when you move your wrist upwards, if my fingers are completely relaxed, right? My hand, everything's completely relaxed. I have no pressure at all. If I just raise my hand up slowly and keep everything relaxed, my fingers will naturally start to close probably because of gravity, I don't know. But as soon as I start doing that, my hand starts to close a little more. As we move our hand to flat, our hand naturally kind of closes a little bit, at least mine does. Naturally kind of closes a little bit as I move my wrist to the flat position. And from there, it's just a little bit more to make sure we don't drop the stick. But if you notice, as I go even higher, my hand will close just a little bit more, and I'm still relaxed. I'm not squeezing at all. I'm literally just moving my hand up and down. That's all I'm doing. Just up, and my hand closes. So what we essentially are doing here is we're keeping this level of closed throughout the grip, and the stroke literally will go from flat right here to up about here. And most of the time you're not going to get completely vertical, just because that's kind of an extreme. And what we want is we want our wrist to start the motion, but our arm is free to react to whatever our wrist starts. So we start here and we lift up with our wrist, and our arm will start to move as a reaction of that. After we've played our first note, it'll just kind of go where it needs to go because everything's relaxed. So really we're just keeping the stick close to our palm so that we can guide the stick everywhere that it goes. The goal of this grip is so that I don't have to constantly change what my hand is doing and what it looks like in order to perform most of the things that I play. And if I do have to change something, it's a very, very tiny adjustment. So small of an adjustment that you can barely see that I'm doing it. All right, so we do the same thing in both hands. That's called matched grip, right? So we do the first third with our thumb, and we put our first finger, our index finger across the street from our thumb, wrap those fingers around. We have no gaps in our grip. Nice and loose, contact without pressure. Contact without pressure. I'm gonna keep saying it over and over again because it's the key to this grip. Contact without pressure. All right, so what happens? We got them, right? All situated, we got contact without pressure. The next piece of the puzzle is to take our sticks and take the beads, place them dead center in the drum, kind of at an angle from each other. Not like this, not like this, not like this, not like this, not like this. Wait, that's pretty close. That's kind of what we want. Let's play our first note. What do? We turn at the wrist to get our first notes. And the reason why is because we want our wrist to go up and down. This is the way our wrist is designed. It's designed, it does this motion way better than it does this motion right here. So we're setting ourselves up to be able to play this way, which means by and large, our palms are gonna be facing down towards the ground. So we have our grip, we put our beads in the center of the drum, and then we're able to start playing our first notes. Now, when we play our notes, we have to think about where it starts from. It starts from the bead. That's where we think about it. We think about it starting from the bead. Is anything gonna happen at the bead? Is the bead gonna move itself? No, it's not. We're gonna start moving with our wrist, and we're gonna pretend like the bead is leading the way. That's the correct chain of events. We don't start from our arm necessarily, at least not at this stage of the game. We start pretending as though someone has got our bead right here like this, and they're throwing it up. And then your wrist goes with it. Your hand goes with the stick, just like that. Contact without pressure. I'm not squeezing, because if I was squeezing, then my wrist would not be able to be pushed up by my own hand, would it? If I was squeezing, I wouldn't be able to push up on it. Holding drumsticks is a lot easier than a lot of people make it out to be. They like to deep dive and get protractors out and start to get the science behind how your fingers are supposed to move and where they're supposed to go and how loose you're supposed to be, and let the stick do what it wants to do, and your hand just kind of there. We just kind of send it on its way and the stick magically plays by itself. It's not how it works. The stick becomes part of your body, and that's what this grip supports. This style of grip supports the stick becoming part of your body, and thus you can use your body to speak a language, and that language is music. If you found this video useful, go ahead and play a quarter note on that like button. If you did not like this video and you completely think I'm dumb and you don't like this at all, please go ahead and play 2/8 notes on the dislike button. Don't forget to tap the subscribe button and then click the bell icon so that you get notified every time I upload something new. And keep on drumming. We'll see you next time. Later, fools.